If you, in some games, for example, you might say, I'm going to start this scene. How about, not even how about, you're waking up, you're next to your wife, getting up in the morning, maybe lazing a little bit. So what's your wife like again? Because like maybe we're just starting to play, right? So what's your wife like again? What's she like? And I say, my wife is like this, blah, blah, blah. And you start playing the wife. But bear in mind that in some games, that's because you needed to ask the player. You needed to ask. The wife cannot be anything except what that player says she is. In other games, perhaps with the very same rules on paper, another way of playing, you say, so what's the wife like? Only because you feel like having a little input and it's your job to say. Right? Those are two different, very profound different ways of saying who actually has the job of being the wife. What the wife is like, the backstory on the wife. Not okay. Who has the backstory on the wife? Does the
Yeah.
GM ask for backstory on the wife?
Okay. I
Or
want
does
to
the
enter
GM
into the
have
Akashic.
backstory on the wife
I
and
want
gets
to
a
enter
little
into the
input for
Akashic
fun?
record for a second here.
Yeah.
It depends on what I'm sensing from the player, and a lot of what I do depends on what I'm sensing from the
Sure.
player.
But
Some people give a lot and some don't. Okay. And it's the people who don't want to give a lot, I don't want to be pushy. I will accommodate them not being very giving.
and
Okay.
fill in and take over that part. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's less a question of who plays the wife. That's not really what I'm asking for. I'm asking, and the way that I ask depends on what I'm hearing. My real goal here is to see if this is something that you will narrate, and really more important, give me a little piece of psychic content that tells me something about your character that would be difficult to elicit from you in a more direct way. That's really what I'm looking for.
That's what you're teaching right there. That's what you're teaching. It's not about how does everybody get online with how many points cost, how many dice cost how many points, or anything like that. I mean, they can always they will pick that up quite easily through the experience and by simply honoring its results. They'll pick that stuff up quite quickly, even in a
I
very
agree.
complicated game. Even I've got Continuum on the shelf from 20 years ago, right? I mean, and I just read that, and you know what? Everyone talked about how terribly complicated it is. It's not. Yeah, there are a lot of little pieces, but every one of them can actually be managed and learned kind of in an order, right? Which things you must, and so that's an important thing about teaching this game is what things of that nature, right? The mechanics should you learn first,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a good thing. The order of those is very important, and that's good for you to consider. But what you're talking about right now is the real learning that you're trying to get across. The notion of what's the fucking poetry? What is the warp and woof of this shared talking that I was talking about before? Right? I hear what you're saying. I imagine stuff and I spit something out that makes sense to me,
Yeah.
and you do the
Yeah.
same,
And
right?
I
So
don't even know if I mentioned the phrase in micro, but it's all over the place in all of the day tripper shit, and it's in core complete. And I said it a minute ago. Psychic
I heard
content
that. Yeah, I heard
is
it.
my word
Yeah,
for that. And I know that makes me sound woo
I
woo
know. I
or
know.
maybe like a Jungian,
I know.
because I am kind of a Jungian. But I really cannot think of a
I
better
know.
phrase. It's the
If it's
most
and that's
evocative.
another important point about teaching. What phrases actually punch and work?
Uh-huh.
Now, nothing works for everybody. Sometimes, a person goes, "Oh, dude, psychic content, I got it." Right? And the next thing you know, he's GMing your ass off. Right? You're like, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow, this guy's way better than me." All he needed was that hint, that one focal phrase. Another person might say, "Huh?
Right.
Unpack that for me. Unpack that. I'm curious. What's that?" Right? And then a
And this
third
is why
person,
I have those
right?
fucking giant
No,
essays.
no,
But
that's why I'm saying
I have.
Okay, and
Okay,
this is
but
what we learned
now
from
I
teaching.
want to loop back around.
Right, right,
I want to loop back.
right, right, right.
Here's where I find myself
Mhm,
consulting you, right?
mhm,
Here's the point I'm at. There are people, fans, people who love core, love my work. They're starting to run their own
mhm.
sessions and all that, right? But this right here.
Right. Got it. Got it. And I will tell you this from theater, from science, from martial arts, the latter two of which I am capable of talking about teaching. Um, and from theater as the victim of much of much teaching. Um,
Hmm.
but which is that the answer needs to be concise and not its own new nexus point of running around in circles. And it should be, and it should actually have some application you to do. Not always, you can't always suddenly come up with an activity to address this, but you can say, I hear you. This is what I say, right? This is what I say to that, or this is my unpacking. But frankly, that's what you need to teach the GM to do in your book,
Hmm.
not what you need to put in the book.
Well, yeah, and
Because
I
it
don't know
is
if you looked
very
at those.
individual, right? You don't know what that person suddenly needed unpacking. And this is why,
Right. So I
yeah,
give them 400 pages on
exactly.
each.
Exactly. And this is why I resisted like rewriting Sorcerer for everybody for all these years, is because I'm saying, look, asshole, my beloved fan, my beloved faithful book buying asshole. Um, I I mean, I love you to pieces, but if you think I'm going to take every one of your gaming neuroses and make a little paragraph, through every part of
Right.
the game about it, and then turn around and this other guy walks up whose neuroses are 100% opposed to yours, but also in full bloom, and I do the same thing, every single thing I say to that guy, you understand, every single thing I say to that guy, it's going to light you up like a firecracker. You're going to run around in circles panicking, and vice versa, right? We can't do that. You can't do it in a classroom. You can't do it I mean, and I'm using classroom very vaguely here, okay? Let's just take the most
I get it.
positive meaning of that word. You can't do it in a learning environment. You will simply get sucked into endless graduate student bullshit. And so that is
Something
right.
felt right that when you said, it might have been the first consult, when you said,
Lab
so
book,
write the
right?
lab book.
Yeah, that's what this is. You got to get
And
back to the
then
activities.
a little bit earlier in this conversation, I said something about that. I don't know if it's a module. I don't think it's a module. Maybe it's a module. Whatever. Something written to train the GM the way that we always write training adventures for
Yeah,
the
no, I
players.
hear you on that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like in my head, I'm starting to see some sort of little
Excellent.
toolkit of like exercises that can be applied to the game modularly.
It would be really nice, except remember I said about the pitfalls of doing it on an exercise approach. And it's the same thing with science teaching, is that if you teach a little thingy and you teach a little thingy and you teach a little thingy, they've still never actually done the thing. And that validation of having done it, regardless of the result, really, the validation of having done it and then getting feedback on it. You see, the feedback's important too, because then the person learning says, oh, they're paying attention to what I'm doing, and what they've said actually makes more sense than it did the first time they said it, now that I've done it. And that's
There has,
huge. It's
I
huge.
know it is.
I
There
mean,
has to be.
it's
There has to be a
everything
way
about
to do
teaching.
this.
Right. And so, well, hold on. Get away from the book and think
Uh,
about how you do this at the table. And that's why I was enjoying playing with you. That's why I
I
thought,
get that.
in theory, why we would continue playing, because then you would actually do the things that you keep struggling with how to do them or how to say them. And I would say, oh, look, you see, you did the
Sure,
things. You already did it.
sure, sure. Yeah. Now, okay. So part of me is kind of like, you know what, if I just if I just like dump the book on him and let him read that, um, Ron already knows all of like I don't have to explain it to him because he already knows. So a lot of me is just depending on you like already knowing.
Well, I appreciate that. There are certain things that I need to learn from you, and I mean learn that I don't
Hmm.
know. Okay, so
The
let's
other
let's.
part,
I'm keeping a certain
and
humility
by
here.
the
There
way,
are
it's not. I
things.
am not
Right,
resistant. I'm
right,
not resistant to running you again. Although
yeah,
I'm glad we're not doing it tonight because I'm
right,
not feeling real great.
right.
I have no resistance against running you again. But the other part of the initial resistance had to do kind of with this like feeling of wasted time
Hmm.
because like in this conversation, okay, a minute ago you made up a fake scene and we expressed something about mechanics, something about approach, and then we tossed that away because now it's in the record.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking, okay, rather than actually playing a whole game, we just sort of like make up the beats of an imaginary game and go
Right,
analysis, discussion, toss it in the can. Next.
right. For purposes of this conversation, sure, its artificiality is a reality, though. I mean, its
Oh
artificiality
yeah,
is
that's,
going to create artifacts. So as long
that's
as we're
true because
very,
I guess the
very
third
self-aware
and
about
most
that, if we can be,
the third
um,
and most actually applicable, direct, logical, and reasonable resistance in the second console
mhm.
was that the pacing of it didn't allow me to soak us both in with the amount of time I usually prefer
Mhm.
because I am looking for psychic content and it takes a little time.
Yeah, I totally get all of that, and the expectation for excellence was not there on my part, right? And I wasn't asking you to prove anything. Just the idea that any kind of imaginative activity could be performed in a valid way, right? Nobody fucking with each other, controlling, outcomes and stuff like that. But that said, I completely get why that particular play experience was making you unhappy. I get that.
Thank you.
Okay. So the the issue here then is, I think, in reviewing this recording, I think that you'll be able very well to, and by the way, I can make the raw recordings available to you personally, right? So that way you don't, I mean, if you want, I mean,
Oh,
the
okay.
unedited, if you want. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
so the that way you have like every and all that stuff the way it should be. So the the way I'm thinking is that we need to, okay, bad phrasing. I recommend that a bunch of, tempting as it may be, a bunch of skill building exercises runs the risk of basically not really teaching to do through doing. And that's another
Well,
thing.
it's the scaffold, but
Right,
we have to
right,
pull it away.
right. And so, but the question is, but even the scaffold says that the person is doing the thing. So
Hmm.
it's, so I'm just going by the
Right, right.
history
Okay,
here,
so
that if you,
I'm trying to think
right.
of books that have sort of like a self-help. I'm thinking of Coincidence by Robert Anton Wilson. I'm thinking about like uh, improv training manuals from Del Close and his school. Uh, things that have like exercise, and then after that, there's a I don't know what it's called, but it's like it's where you break down what you did in the
Hmm.
exercise and
Hmm.
get
Yeah,
feedback on it.
right. Now there, that all of those have their place, but I do not actually think they have worked all that well, except in one context, and that is professional training. And the problem with professional training is it is about meeting the standards of some industry or some payment scheme, some means of performance. And here we're not talking about this. Here we're talking more about learning to play a musical instrument. And I know I'm beating this into the ground, but it is valid. You don't, I mean, when you're learning to play an instrument, yes, you learn to play scales and you learn to just do like the basics and that kind of thing, but you do it with fucking songs. You do actually have the person, very soon, they beat their way through a song, basic as it may be, and they say, I played that song and I can get feedback on that. I can, and at least they say, and I played the song. Otherwise, they will either become hyper invested in becoming a perpetual student, or the culture of doing these exercises together, right? The actor person thing. Or third, worse, perhaps better for them, say, fuck it. All I'm doing is these exercises, and all I'm doing is going toot toot, and all I'm doing is, um, you know, and they start losing faith in the notion that they could ever actually play a song, right? And that is what happens in martial arts. That is what happens in martial arts. The person becomes, you get those three people, right? You get the martial arts person,
Well,
right?
actually, even in music,
Yeah.
right?
Uh
Even
huh.
in music,
Yeah.
because before you can really get to a song, if you're being trained by someone who knows what they're doing, you generally have to work on posture,
Right. There are a
fingering,
few things,
scale,
right?
and just doing those scales up and down.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck this.
Uh huh.
A lot of people bail right
Right.
there
Right. Now, but the
because they
thing,
never got
right?
to a whole song.
Right. But the important point is that a good instructor knows that if they get too hyped up in all of that stuff, they want posture and fingering and scales and breathing and everything to be perfect before they let the person try a song. That's bad teaching.
I agree.
And so,
I agree.
therefore, we all recognize the importance of all those things, but nobody who's good at doing this ever got good because they got good at all of those things before they enjoyed having done it. I mean, doing it all the way through, however poorly, but the person says, you did it, you got all the way through, you did it. Now we're going to work on what it's going to be like doing it next time. Now we're going to work on your posture a little bit.
Right. Okay. I've seen this done badly in
Mm-hmm.
LARPs
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even in some story games. Um, but I've seen it done well in more, I don't know, academic, I guess, or scientific settings, perhaps
Mm-hmm.
art installations. Okay, have you ever tried anything with like a some sort of post game qualitative feedback form, a report
Okay.
card?
No, I do something else. Actually, I do something else, which is not um, as, what is the word I want? Not as explicit, not as formalized,
Hmm.
but it is very substantial. And there are several things that I know just to let sit and talk about later, like not right away, because over reflection is a problem,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
true.
So therefore, instead of like a special form to fill out or something like that, nothing of the kind. I used to do that years and years ago, and so I've tried it. This, on the other hand, is just a matter of saying, you know what? And here I'm going to quote you: these people aren't, as of now, my students. Yes, this person and that person has something to learn from me, evidently, at least insofar as playing this game is concerned. That's great. We'll continue to work on it. But the fact is that I need them to eventually know that what they say will be heard. I don't get to say whether what they say goes in or not.